So as far as the actual experience,
And in the back of my head, I continue to think, shh, hold on.
Hello, hello, hello. Let's see. Can you all see me on today? See them heard. If you can see me, give me a thumbs up because we are in the land of yes. Okay. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Paula. Paula said that you all can see me. I'm looking at the chats. I appreciate you all. Oops, I just did a thing. Hold, please. So as I'm beginning to do this, let me talk about how interesting technology is for those of us who are navigating the world of, the world of COVID-19 and the adjustments. I want to say that one of the things I learned is that it requires that we have a level of flexibility that we may not ever had to have before. Am I right or am I right? I know I'm right because I've been required to be flexible in ways I never have before. And with that, I think we're on. Now, for those of you who are here, if you would please do me the favor of turning your device on mute, muting yourself. I've muted some of you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, as we go, we will be taking questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask those. And I'll be covering through the PowerPoint presentation I have prepared. And once I go to that, at the end, I'll take questions. But certainly if anything comes up in the meantime, feel free to ask. All right. So with that being said, welcome. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for your patience. For those of you who registered for the training 2 weeks ago, I appreciate that you decided to hang in there and stay with me today as we speak about preparing your team for life after COVID-19. Now, for those of you who are here, you've likely been in a situation where your company has experienced some upheavals. Am I right? Your companies have experienced some upheavals. I know that for myself as a small business owner, I've experienced quite the pivot in terms of what it is that I do and how I deliver my services. And I've been able to be flexible and nimble enough to move with some of those that where I haven't lost a lot of traction. But if I must be honest, it was a bit of a shakeup, as I imagine it was for all types of businesses, small or large. So with that being said, I want to introduce myself to those of you who don't know me. My name is Rhonda Gipson-Willis. I am the founder and CEO of RGW Ventures. RGW Ventures is a leadership development coaching firm. I do trainings, I do speaking as a corporate trainer. I've been doing trainings for the last 7 years or so. The majority of my trainings have been face-to-face trainings. I also do, obviously, virtual trainings. This is one of the first official corporate virtual trainings that I've done, and I'm looking to incorporate that into what I do, as I believe that with the COVID, what's happened as a result of COVID-19 is that we are going to evolve into a space where we're going to see a lot more virtual communication, virtual connection. Obviously, my very favorite form of training is when I'm in a room with people. I like to bounce off of the energy, but we're going to make it do what it do because that's what it does, right? So some of my corporate training clients include the University of Notre Dame, Bowling Vision, JCO, as well as a couple of other manufacturing plants, Bethel University, Beacon Health Systems, the City of South Bend, just to name a few. And if you're lucky, it could be your company too. So I'm also a motivational speaker. I speak on a variety of topics. I speak as on purpose. I speak on leadership. I can pretty much craft a message for whatever audience that you're looking to inspire, that you want to train. And here's the other thing. I have been a licensed therapist for the last 17 years. I have an LCSW, I have a master's degree in social work, which over the last 7 years, I haven't really tapped into a lot because I have been working full-time in my business as a corporate trainer, as an executive coach, and I hadn't really used my license until recently when I went back into the field, because I noticed that there was a gap, that there was a missing component in terms of representation for what I was seeing in the field. There were a lot of Black women who were in need of therapists, and there were very few Black female therapists in town. So That's one of the things I decided to do. That's something that I also do. I do virtually as well. I'm a certified coach. I'm a certified leadership coach. I'm a life coach. And so there are a lot under the umbrella of RGW Ventures. And I'm also an Amazon best-selling author. But my all-time most coveted title is that of wife and mother. I've been a wife for almost 25 years. I've been a mother for a little longer than that. And my husband and I, Andre, we have 4 beautiful daughters. And that is probably my most proudest accomplishment today. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. The agenda is going to be a bit of the where we were, where we're at, and where we go from here. Where we were, where we're at, and where we go from here. Now, where we were, in terms of working as a corporate trainer and going in and having a pulse on what's happening in the country, having a pulse of what's happening nationwide, doing leadership development, soft skills training, and speaking with companies, one of the things that I knew and one of the things I train on quite a bit is employee engagement, how to increase the employee engagement numbers. And if I'm being honest, if you look at the statistics around employee engagement, you'll find that most employees are not engaged in their work. According to Gallup does a research study every couple of years, and what they find is they look at the numbers and they've determined that you have your employees are typically in 3 different categories. They're either engaged, they're either not engaged, or they're actively disengaged. If you have notes, if you're taking notes, I want you to write those 3 categories down because I'm going to explain them to you. And when I explain them to you, I guarantee that there are going to be people who come to your mind. So for those of you who are thinking engaged, there's approximately 29%. Those numbers change a little bit, just a little bit every year. Approximately 29% of your employees are what they refer to as actively engaged. These are people who are passionate about their jobs. They show up, they give more, they are the leaders, they drive innovation, they are really passionate about the work that they do. That represents approximately 30% of your employees. Then another 52%, these are the folks that they've termed as not engaged. Not engaged employees basically means that they show up for the paycheck, their heart's not really in it, they do the work, they do just enough work, and for a lot of them, they basically quit and stayed. They quit and stayed. And some of you are recognizing what that is because some of you have likely also quit and stayed in different stages of your life. Then approximately 19% of your employees represent those who are actively disengaged. Now, what does actively disengaged mean? Actively disengaged are those employees who are basically making everybody else around them miserable. They hate their jobs. They make no bones about the fact that they do. They may show up every day. They may do their work. They may do their work well, but they are like poison to your system. They are actively working to destroy the fabric of the culture of your system. And for a large part, some of them you can't get rid of because they do their job really well. Some of them do their jobs really well. And so what we know is that's pretty much the landscape of the American workforce at this time. And I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty dismal. And I don't want to see average in the companies that I work with. In the companies that I want to work with, I want to see that number, if it's at the 30%, which is average, I want to see that increase steadily. And there are ways around how to really focus on increasing those numbers and what you can do as an organization to position yourself to increase your employee engagement numbers, right? Because here's the thing that we know. I don't care how fancy your bells and whistles are. I don't care how great your benefits are. I don't care how beautiful your building are. If your people are not passionate about the work that they do, if your people are not excited about the work that they do, if your people come in and they hate their jobs, it's going to impact your bottom line. It won't matter how great you look. Your employees are your most valuable asset. And so if only 30% of them are engaged, to me, that's a problem. And that's something I want to help companies address and get better. So what do we know? We know that approximately 3 months, a little over 3 months ago, out of the blue, right? It felt like it was out of the blue. This no name, no nonsense, came to kick down the door and take names virus called coronavirus, COVID-19, and came into our lives. And when it came into our lives, it shook things up. It made us have to become familiar with terms that we had never used before, things that have never been in our lexicon before. We are now using as if they are regular vocabulary. This is how things have always been. It feels like that sometimes, right? It feels like that. It's been a little less than 3 months. It's been a little less than 3 months. But what we found is we're doing things like social distancing, right? Social distancing. I don't know about you all, but I saw a picture of what they were recommending classrooms look like. And it broke my heart because in the recommendation of what classrooms look like, there was a lot of not only distance between children as in air, but there were physical barriers. There were physical barriers. And so we talk about social distancing and how necessary community is for a lot of us. And I'm gonna talk more about that in terms of what we need to do to make sure that our employees are okay. But you're dealing with people who have had to deal with social distancing, the fear and anxiety that comes from going to the grocery store and recognizing that people are not socially distancing the way that they should be. Or is it just me? I'm going to the grocery store wondering, why are people not as concerned about giving each other space as I think they should be? I'm wondering these things. You have employees who are home working alone. You have a lot of fear. There are a lot of your employees who hop on these Zoom calls, right? Because for a lot of folks, they have been in environments where maybe working virtually was not an option or a possibility until COVID hit. Maybe working virtually was not something that they ever considered. Maybe working virtually was something that they never wanted. But now you have a large percentage, perhaps, of your workforce working virtually from home. And I don't know about you, but my days went from spending a considerable amount of time with people to spending a considerable amount of time looking at a screen. And there's something about looking at a screen and interacting with the screen that I found increasingly draining. Is it just me? That it was very draining. It was very draining to interact behind a screen. So lives have changed significantly. And a large part of that is there are a lot of people who are dealing with loneliness. There are a lot of people who are dealing with loneliness. And this is where I'm going to put in my social worker, mental health therapist hat. They have found that research finds that loneliness is as much of a health threat as most anything else. It can lead to stress, anxiety, heart disease, death, all of the major things that you're talking about. When you look at the loneliness, being alone and not just being alone, but being lonely. And what I found as I go through the social media pages, as people are reaching out to me, is that there are a lot of people who have been used to going out and about and being around people at work, even if they were introverts, even if they didn't necessarily hang out with the cool kids, even if they didn't do all of that, who are now spending a considerable amount of time alone and are experiencing loneliness. These people will be coming back to your job, to your workplace at some point, right? We're starting to we were at stage 4 that they were leveling up, and if they haven't already come back, they're going to start coming back. And I'm here to tell you, you're going to have a lot of employees who come back different in the way that they left. They're going to come back different in the way that they left. They predict that the next pandemic behind COVID-19 is going to be a mental health pandemic. Now, am I saying that as an employer, it's your responsibility? It's your responsibility to take care of and manage the mental and emotional well-being of your employees? Well, no, it's not your responsibility, but it behooves you. It behooves you to understand what trauma looks like in an employee, what trauma looks like for an individual, what mental health issues, what that decline looks like for your employees as they are transitioning back into roles that they left that maybe they were really good at. What do you look for? What are the things that you need to be aware of? How do you check in? So when I talk about trauma, it's very easy to look at trauma and say, I understand trauma from the perspective of an individual. As an individual, we think of trauma as something that's happened to us, to our person. to our person. The trauma is basically defined as an uncontrollable event that you're not really sure how you can control, if you have any control over, right? Organizational trauma is also a type of trauma that I train on. I have a whole training on organizational trauma. And I'm telling you, I have an hour, and so I'm not going to be able to get into everything the way that I would like to do deep dives and to really help, but I'm going to give you enough to be able to go back and know what it is that you need to look for, or how you can protect and build resilience in your team so that you can get the best case scenario. And obviously, if there's something that I say and you think that you would like to see more, you'd like to have me come to your team and train on, you can reach out to my team. You can go to rondaletstalk.com, fill out a form, and we can get you started and situated and see what it is that you need. But as we speak about organizational trauma, a lot of people have no idea that that's a thing. So organizational trauma is an injury to an organization resulting from a single event or the impact of an accumulation of events. An injury to an organization. So what does that look like? Some examples of organizational trauma include layoffs and acquisitions, violence in the workplace, death or serious injury, natural disasters, fires, floods, major reorganizations. We don't think about how that is actually traumatic and traumatizing to our business structure, the turnover of senior leadership, or the sudden loss of key talent. And then let's add on top of that a global pandemic that basically puts your employment at bay. You're not real sure what is going to happen next. So suffice it to say that not only is your organization experiencing trauma, even if you don't recognize that that's a thing as a living, breathing organism, because really that's what your business is. It's a living, breathing organism full of people who are very well traumatized at this moment. I want you to recognize that, full of people who don't understand, who have an increased amount of fear and uncertainty. That's the recipe for anxiety. Fear plus uncertainty equals anxiety. It's really difficult to focus on work with an anxious mind. It's really difficult to show up as your best self. And so if you have no other if you have no other anything to make you want to take this as a serious thing, take it as the fact that your employees, if they're not at their best, they can't give you their best, right? So the question becomes, okay, Rhonda, you told us what we know. Now what? Now what? How do we move on from this? What do we do? Well, from an individual standpoint, and those of you who are on here, I suspect you are all individual people. As individual people, we have to know how to guard ourselves and build up our own personal resistance to trauma through resilience. Resilience is like, imagine that your immune system, right? Your immune system, as you build up your immune system, if you become sick, first of all, you're less likely to get sick in some ways than other people will. But if you get sick, your ability to bounce back is a little stronger. So that's basically what resilience looks like. Resilience is a process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant or maybe insignificant sources of stress. So there are some, think about it, there are some people who you would say that they are very resilient, and there are some people who you say, their resilience, they struggle a lot with that. So how do you build up resilience? I have 10 steps. I'm going to go through them really quickly. But there are 10 things to think of as you look at how do you build that muscle? How do you build that muscle? The first thing is, my clicker stopped clicking. Hold on. There we go. Make connections. Make connections. I talked about loneliness. There are a lot of people who are lonely right now because they hadn't made connections, or they're disconnected from those connections. Make connections. The more connections you make ahead of time, the more able you are to deal with when things happen, because you have a support system around you. So if you don't have connections, if you found that you're in the middle of this pandemic and you're struggling and you're not real sure what to do, look at how to make connections. Who can you connect with? Is there someone in your in your social network? Is there someone on your social media networks? How do you connect with people? But the best thing to do is make those connections ahead of time. Second, avoid seeing crisis as an insurmountable problem. Now that's, there are folks that I work with as both a therapist and a coach who ascribe to this method of thinking that I refer to as all or nothing, right? Everything is either all black or all white. And sometimes it takes being able to sit and conceptualize and process out loud that thing that they're struggling with, that they're concerned with, to be able to help them play in the middle and to not see it as either a 0 or 100 event. And so avoid seeing crisis is insurmountable. Move towards your goals. Now I want to be very careful with this one, because when I say move towards your goal, I'm thinking about the meme that I keep seeing on social media that says, if during this pandemic you have not written your best-selling novel, if you've not pitched your soundtrack, if you've not done all of these things, then your issue was never about time, it was about lack of discipline. Please know that during this time of a national pandemic, which is basically a mental health crisis as well, the best you can do, some of you can do, is give yourself permission to Netflix and chill. Give yourself permission to establish goals that are not these lifelong, big, lofty goals. This is not the time unless you feel equipped to do it. If you don't feel equipped to do it, don't do it. But establish goals for your day. If that goal is just that you are going to make breakfast every day, put goals in place and then move actively towards them. Also, accepting that change is a part of life. If you accept that change is a part of life, it's easier to navigate as changes happen. Let's face it, when your employees come back to work, there will be changes. There will be changes. There will be plenty of changes. And so helping them navigate that, helping them to understand what that's going to look like is going to require perhaps some conversation and knowledge and acceptance of the fact that change is a part of living. Some of your employees will have different positions. Some of your employees won't have positions. Some of your employees will be expected to do more with less. It's oftentimes how you sell that. It's oftentimes how they receive that. So accepting that change is a part of living. Take decisive actions. This is very much a time where it feels like it's difficult to make a decision because things are changing every day. But as you take decisive actions, give yourself the opportunity to pivot if you need to. But make decisions. The longer you think about something, typically is not the way that you come to become more comfortable with it. It's only when you start to walk in that action, you walk those thoughts out, that you can truly start to feel better about that. Look for opportunities for self-discovery. So this is one of my favorite things to tell people and remind people to do as they're in this season. Get to know yourself. Get to know yourself. Understand who you are, why you are. You're going to be dealing with some feelings that you haven't dealt with in years. There are some of you who, because you've spent your life being so driven and working so hard and doing so many things, that the slowdown hit you like a ton of bricks. The slowdown put you face to face with yourself in ways that you didn't recognize yourself. This is an opportunity for you to dive deeper into who you truly are, what you truly desire, what makes you happy, and what you're willing to let go of. The next is you want to nurture a positive view of yourself. Part of that means that you have to be willing to give yourself some grace. You have to be willing to give yourself the benefit of the doubt. You have to be willing to say, okay, you know what? Give yourself permission to suck. I didn't do as well at that thing as I thought I was going to, but you know what? I tried it. Give yourself affirmations, kudos every day, because it's very easy to get in a space where you're unfamiliar, and then you're dealing with unfamiliar things, and then the learning curve starts to have an impact on how you feel about yourself. You want to make sure you keep things in perspective. Again, did I mention we are in the middle of a global pandemic? If you're falling apart a little bit, that's okay. If you're falling apart a little bit, that's okay. Now, the trick is not to stay falling apart. The trick is, how do you bounce back up? How do you do those things? And part of that is allowing yourself to put things in perspective. Put things and keep them in their proper perspective. And sometimes it requires an outside voice to do that. Sometimes it requires somebody outside of you who has a level of objectivity that you don't have for yourself. So whether that's a friend who could be really objective with you, whether that's a coach, whether that's a supervisor, whether that's a therapist, whomever it is, get you an outside voice to help you process those things that are going on in your head. And then here's one of my favorites. You want to maintain a helpful and a hopeful outlook. A hopeful outlook. What does that look like? Does it look like this Pollyanna-ish perspective on the world, that everything's going to be great, so I don't have to work hard at anything, I don't have to try anything because everything's going to turn out? No. It means choosing optimism when you have the opportunity. Look at even with the perspective, look at it as the glass half full instead of half empty. How is it that what you look at is what you tend to see? I speak on that a lot. I talk about the part of your brain. There's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system, that part of your brain is responsible. That part is responsible for bringing to you what it is that you focus on. That's why in November, everybody's doing these gratitude journals and all of a sudden everybody feels really grateful. Well, your brain is going, oh, okay, we're focused on gratitude. Let me show you things to be grateful for. Let me show you things to feel good about. Let me prove to you how right you are. The reticular activating system's job is to prove you right. And if you want a more practical example of the reticular activating system, I'm going to ask, have any of you ever bought a new car? And right before you bought that new car, you had never seen a car like that car before. Like you thought it was the first car that you've seen like that ever. Okay, Janae, I did the same thing. I remember back in 2001, my husband and I brought a Ford Expedition. I had never seen an Eddie Bauer Ford Expedition in town. I'd only heard about it on the radio with the rap singers and stuff, you know, when they hanging in the passenger side of the best friend ride, and I had a bunch of kids and I was in a mom van. And I said, you know what? I would love to have an Expedition. I'd be the only one in town to have that Expedition. Look at it, it's so pretty. Brought that Expedition, drove it off the lot, and do you know what happened? On the way home, guess what I started to see? I started to see Expedition, and they were Expeditions that looked exactly like mine. If you've had that experience, you know, it's not that all of a sudden there was a car convention and the car is just this exact same car that you brought came to you. It's the fact that because your focus changed, what was brought to you was changed by your reticular activating system. I like to call him Raz. Like I think of him as a bodyguard outside the club of my mind. Like that's Raz. He only lets in what I focus on. So if you focus on hopeful things, guess what you see? You see hope. You focus on hopeful things, you see hope. You focus on doom and gloom, Raz goes, okay, we're doom and glooming. I got you. I'll find you some doom and gloom. And the final step is take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. What does that look like? Does it look like for you yoga and Pilates? Does it look like for you Netflix and chill? Does it look like for you building your empire? Whatever it looks like for you, let that be for you. Don't compare yourself to other people. Don't expect that you're going to do things that you did before this global pandemic hit. Don't expect that what happened in those ways and the results that you got are going to be the same results that you get today. But take care of yourself. Those are 10 things that you can do, and they're pretty theoretically simple things that you can do. Theoretically, they are simple things that you can do to help increase your resilience so that you can be able to bounce back from when things come, when things happen that kind of throw you off kilter. So what do you do as an organization? What do you do as an organization, right? For my HR directors, for my CEOs, for my managers, as you're looking at your company, which is built up of people who have to work on their own individual resilience. How do you build resilience from an organizational standpoint? The first thing you have to do is you have to be communicative. Are you communicating constantly? Are you communicating to your staff? What does that communication look like? How clear is it? How concise is it? If there's something that you don't know, this is the time to say, this is not something that we know. This is the time to say, we'll have more information on that at another point. At this point, this is what we know. The lack of communication, the uncertainty increases the anxiety of your employees. The next with communication, to piggyback off of that, is you have to strive for progress. So striving for progress means that just because you communicated it once in one way doesn't mean that that's good enough. You have to strive for progress. You have to look at recommunicating and recommunicating anything that's important. You want to make sure that your employees get the point and that they get it without there being any question, as clearly as possible. For you, you have to strive to be not only a messenger, but a deliverer of the message in a way, in a method that they get. The next thing you want to do is empower your staff. How do you empower your employees? How do you empower them to be able to make decisions that allow them to come back and feel like they're part of that decision? I don't know, maybe for you and your team that looks like surveys. Maybe that looks like allowing your employees to reapply for different positions if they're interested in. Maybe that means that they get a voice on when they come back, how they come back, what it looks like to work from home. How do you empower your employees? Because here's the thing, when people have an opportunity to buy in, they're more likely to commit. They're more likely to feel a part of. They're more likely to follow through on that thing that they're buying into when they're able to communicate, when they feel like they've been empowered to give that input. And then the final thing is, how are you supporting your employees' ability to connect? Whether that's generating and nourishing relationships between them. I once spoke with a guy, and he was talking about one of his former employers. And his team had gotten this idea that they were going to go out for lunch at least one day a week. She put a stop to that. Because she felt that if they went out once a week, that all they would do was talk negatively about work. Here's the thing, if you're a company that you're worried about your employees speaking negatively about work, so you don't want them to get together, that's not a them issue. That's an organizational issue. That's a structural issue. You should be encouraging your employees to not only connect, and I'm not talking just about connecting on a physical level, I'm talking about connecting on an emotional level, getting to know each other, building up their team. In one of my team building trainings, I asked 3 very simple questions. It's like we go around round robin and I ask 3 very simple questions. And by asking those questions, those 3 very simple questions, what tends to happen after we debrief is people say, wow, I never knew that about you. Wow, that makes sense. I understand. That connects why you do this thing. It allowed people to connect with commonalities that they have with each other. And when you connect with people, it's easier to come together and support each other in ways that you couldn't otherwise if you don't know each other like that. When you're able to connect, it allows you to invest in relationships, not just at a superficial work level, but at a vulnerability trust level, which is basically what you need in order to have a well-functioning team. You have to start with a basic premise of vulnerability trust. And every team that I've worked with, I've found that if they don't have vulnerability trust, they don't have anything else. If you don't have vulnerability trust with your team, which is very different than predictive trust. Predictive trust says, I trust that Andre is going to come to work at 8 o'clock every morning. I trust that Janae is going to do what it is that she's supposed to. I trust that if I hand something over to Monica, it's going to get done. Vulnerability trust says, can I be real with you? Vulnerability trust says, can I say to you, you know what? I didn't get that right today. Vulnerability trust allows you to connect and apologize in ways that the lack of vulnerability trust doesn't. And when you don't have that, it's very difficult to function well as a team. So that connection is very important, very important. If you've not built that into your team structure, into your team culture, look at ways that you can do that. How can you do that? The last thing is to assess. Assess, assess, assess. Assess where you're at, not just once. Not just once. You have to assess to get a baseline, and then you have to reassess. There's a quote that says, prescription without diagnosis, prescription without assessment is malpractice. If you don't assess what's going on, if I don't come into your company, and part of my assessment when I come into a company is, sometimes I do evaluations, sometimes I have conversations, but I come in to assess the landscape. Sometimes I come in and I come in with a set agenda based on what the leadership team has said, but all while I'm doing the training, I'm assessing the needs of your staff. And there have been times that I've gone back to the leadership team or whoever the key decision maker that brought me in, and I say, I understand you wanted to do this, this, and this, but this is what I believe to be more applicable to this team based on what it was that I saw. If you're not willing to assess and then pivot your plan, you're doing your people a disservice. You have to be willing to assess and pivot. So with that, let's take a look. Let's take a look at where a lot of companies are right now. Let's take a look at what's going on. Let's take a look. What does your company culture look like? What does your company culture look like? And here's the thing that I can tell you. When I ask that question, I tend to get the CEO version of that, which sounds a lot like the value statement that's on the wall. It sounds a lot like the value statement that's on the wall. But sometimes when I walk into the building, I get a different feeling. Your culture is what introduces you to me before any one of those written words could. Your culture is, how do your employees truly feel about the place that they work? And you can tell when you walk into an establishment what the culture is and what's important to leadership, and not only what's important to leadership, but how they're supporting it. I want to give you an example. If I'm having a really crummy day, I know that there's a company who has a culture behind service and treating me really well. And I'm going to go there for lunch. Can anybody guess where that is? It's my honor to serve you. It's my privilege to serve you. Oh, I love sometimes I run through the drive-thru twice. Chick-fil-A has a company culture that's steeped in service. It's steep. From the moment you walk through the door, you feel it. From the moment you pull up to the drive-thru, when you come and there's somebody who's helping you to navigate the new system, because they care about the customer experience. That's what I know about their culture. Now, if you think about some other companies, if you think about perhaps a McDonald's, when you walk into a McDonald's, sometimes it's hit or miss. It's hit or miss. Their company culture isn't very well defined, right? So ask yourself, what is your company culture most model? Is it more of a Chick-fil-A where you know that every person is going to have a similar experience? Or is it a McDonald's where it's hit or miss? Not only every person that's your customer, but every employee. How are your employees engaging with your culture? Because if they're disengaged with your culture, if there's a disconnect, then that's a problem for you. Not for them, that's a problem for you. So with that being said, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. As we talk about culture, as we talk about, if you're watching the news at any point in this last 2 weeks, you have been inundated with social injustice, racial injustice, racism, systemic oppression. Companies are looking at how to realign their structures, how they're marketing, how they're speaking to, how they're making it known that Black Lives Matter. I was going to say all lives matter, but Black Lives Matter, right? Because particularly we're in this season. As a company, is that something that's been at your forefront in terms of how you look at, how you treat, how you welcome, how you embrace all of your employees? So that leads us straight to diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. Because right now you have employees at home who are considering whether or not they're coming back because of what their experience might be like in that way, right? So diversity is defined as the state of being diverse or varied. The state of being diverse and varied. There's something interesting that's happened. I've had the experience to have a lot of conversations prior to COVID shutting everything down. I was doing a lot of networking. I was hobnobbing with a lot of executives and owners of businesses and people in really high positions. And as we were having these conversations, I was asking them these questions. I was asking them these questions like, how diverse is your workforce? How diverse is your workforce? And they said, oh, you know, we're pretty diverse. We're pretty diverse. I say, how diverse is your team, right? If I'm talking to a manager, if I'm talking to someone who's on a team, how diverse is your team? It's okay. Then I get up to how diverse is your management team? And as you're sitting there, I want you to think of the answer to these questions for yourself. As you look around the landscape of your company right now, how diverse is your management team? When all the managers come together, what does that look like? Now, how diverse is your executive team? And finally, how diverse is your board? And I'm wondering if for some of you, the higher the org chart got, the less diversity you saw. And I'm going to challenge you and say that it's not because there aren't qualified candidates. It's not because there aren't people who could fit these positions. There might be some missing opportunities, right? There might be some missing opportunities. I spoke before about going back into therapy because of representation. What I recognized is that for a lot of African-American people, one of the barriers to going to a therapist was that there was very little representation. They didn't see anybody who looked like them. In your company, if the higher you go up, there's nobody who looks like them, then it makes it difficult for them to conceptualize that that's something that's possible for them in an organization. Inclusion is the active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with diversity. It's not enough to say, we went to that school that one time, we looked for it that one time. How pervasive is inclusion a part of your plan? As you look and your employees are coming back, and I guarantee you, some of them are going to be looking at this with a different lens after these last 2 weeks. They're going to be looking at it differently. Are you ready for that? Are you ready with a plan? Do you have a plan that's more than a piece of paper or more than a plan on paper? How are you walking that thing out? What does that look like? Do they know what it looks like? Remember, I talked about communicating and then striving to communicate it again. So then we talk about equity. Equity is the guarantee of fair treatment, access to opportunity, and advancement for people. My thing is covered up, while striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the participation of some groups. Now, here's the thing, and I want to say this to you, corporate America. I understand that sometimes those barriers have not been intentional. Maybe sometimes those barriers have not been conscious. But I'm going to tell you that sometimes those barriers likely have been. And for a large part of the history of what we deal with in a country that's set up the way that our country is set up with as a capitalistic type of endeavor, is that there are sometimes barriers in place to keep certain people out. And what that requires is a making up. So when we hear fair treatment, oftentimes when you talk about fair, listen, I have 4 children. I had to deal with that's not fair. They're all different ages. And what they didn't understand was that it would have been patently unfair to treat them fairly, to treat them all exactly the same at the same time. It would have been unfair. If my, at the time, 17-year-old was treated the same way my 7-year-old was, it would have technically been fair, but it would have been unfair to her. And so when you look at equity, you have to look at how do you balance the states? How do you balance that? And I have a graphic that speaks to that. So you look at equality. Equality, you notice that the little fella on the right, on the left side of the screen, he has the exact same advantage that everybody else has. with what he's been given to use as a step stool. And he still can't see. He still can't see. That's what equality looks like. What equity looks like is a shifting of resources, a shifting of priority, being intentional about making sure that everybody has the same level of access, that they can see the same thing, not that they have the same things to work with. That's not equity, that's equality. And now what? Right now what? This is where RGW Ventures comes in, right? This is where we start talking solutions and what does that look like for you? What are the things that perhaps I could do to help to assist you with this? Well, one of the things, for those of you who are here, some of you have probably already seen me do trainings. I'm looking to incorporate not only even more trainings outside of here, but obviously more virtual trainings where there's opportunity to have participation, presentation, things like that. But some of the trainings that I've created thus far have been Love Your Job, Love Your Life. That's an employee engagement training where we look to increase that number from 30% to 50 to 60. I have a training called Conflict is Your Friend, No Really. It talks about normalizing conflict. It talks about conflict resolution. It talks about why productive conflict is necessary to make your team as great as it can be. How do you monopolize that? How do you use that to your benefit? Falling in Like with Change, that's a training that's geared towards helping people to navigate changes as they come along, right? Falling in Like with Change. It assesses their change style and then speaks to how we need all of these styles and how each person can play their particular role. One of the things I like about a lot of the trainings that I do is I really focus on self-assessment, self-discovery. I do behavioral types of assessments so that we understand who we are, so we can best understand how to work with each other and how to build upon the strengths of our team. And so Falling in Like with Change gives you an opportunity to really understand how you respond to change and how to best leverage that in your company's best interest. Trust Matters, which is basically trust building. I also have a training called Yesterday I Was Your Friend, Today I'm Your Boss. That's the training where you went from being one of the coworkers to now you're the boss of all of your friends. They basically found that that's the most difficult step to take in the workforce. That's the most difficult promotion to get. Once you get that promotion where you go from being one of the boys to being the man, it's really difficult to navigate. So in that training, we talk a lot about delegation. We talk about boundary setting. We talk about really setting clear intentions and watching for favoritism. So things like that. And then I do team building. I do diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do a number of other trainings. That's just a few of the trainings that I do. I could do them in various, whether they are 2 hours, 4 hours, retreats, you name it. I also do executive coaching. So executive coaching allows for one-on-one time with me that gives you access to be able to have an objective person to help you navigate some of the business and grow in your leadership acumen. So what that really is it's the ability to have someone from the outside who is not your supervisor, who you can speak objectively about. What I find is a lot of people have a hard time speaking to their supervisor about things and how to best manage and grow through what it is they're growing through, that if they had somebody on the outside or an objective voice, they can get to the finish line sooner. Plus, it allows for an opportunity to identify those leadership gaps, and then develop a plan of action to fill those. There's also consulting and strategy. So if you need expert advice, if you need assistance with an issue, we've done conflict resolution where we've gone in and worked with a couple of employees who were struggling with an interpersonal issue. I have someone on my team who does strategic planning, just about anything that you're looking for in a corporation in terms of how you assess, identify what the issue is, and then plug that hole and fix that. So also, this is the thing that I'm most excited about right now, because of how it also plugs into the diversity, inclusion, and equity talk. So I have group leadership development programs. I have a group leadership development program, and part of that program requires that there are assessments, there is facilitated discussion, there's coaching, they get assignments, they have opportunities for experiential learning. And so this is different from a presentation, because in the presentation, I come, I give you information, and then I hope you do something with it. With this, they have the opportunity, they have access to me more regularly, but also to practice out that thing that they do and then come back and report how it worked. That helps to concretize the information. That helps to make it real. That helps to allow them to grow in an actual way as opposed to a theoretical way. And one of the things that I'm launching in the middle of next month is a specific group that will take in members from various different organizations, various different companies, and put them in a group together. And I specifically want to work with group employees who are part of minority represented groups to allow for the development and the succession planning, so you can start putting some more Black and brown people in your leadership pipeline. So as you look at your diversity, and the closer you get to the top, the less diversity you see. How are you developing those employees? What are you doing to invest in them? How are you helping them to be the people who are able to stand up and in these positions and be prepared for that leadership position? Maybe they need an additional nudge. Maybe they haven't seen that representation. Maybe they're not real comfortable with what that looks like from an organizational standpoint. And so one of the groups that I'm doing is specifically, at least one of the groups, depending on what feedback looks like, at least one of the group is going to be specifically for minority represented. And it will be to develop leadership acumen. It will be part of what allows you to come alongside them with equity, not equality, equity. What does that look like for your employee as you invest in their leadership development skills? And for any of that, so if you're looking to schedule a training with me, if you want more information on a service, if you want to schedule a consult, if you go to rhondaletstalk.com, that'll take you straight to my inquiry form. And my assistant will get back to you, and then we can get you rolling and address what your needs are. If you are looking to connect with me directly, you can go to my email address at rhondagipsonwillis.com. If you have a question about any of my services, you can connect with my assistant at support@rhondagipsonwillis.com. But for now, I'm going to take some questions. So I have Andre's been taking over and getting some questions for me. I'm going to sit down. What do you have? Are there any questions, Andre?
Not yet.
Okay, so there's no questions? All right. All right, I see this is eye-opening. I can believe that. That will be great. Virtual happy hours are good. Okay. That's why it's imperative to keep a pulse on employee engagement. Yes. All right, so does anybody have, thank you, Monica. Monica said, excellent presentation. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I said? You get an opportunity, I will entertain questions as long as you need. Just unmute yourself. Hey, Janae.
Hey, Rhonda, how are you?
Great, I'm great. So,
So I have a question for you. So I work at Bradley Company. We have an awesome EAP program.
Yeah.
So I totally understand how communication is key. So we have a COVID team internally that we've been communicating to our employees. And so how, even though I've been offering the EAP, what else do I need to say about it? I'm not a mental health professional, but I understand the services and they are so great.
Yeah.
How do I ensure that they take that step to actually make a phone call? What else can I say to them?
Yeah, so here's the thing that's really difficult. I think when we go and we speak about mental health, and particularly when we talk about in an employer type of situation, oftentimes people feel like they have something to lose if they seek out these services. Oftentimes they feel like it's going to cause them to have a blemish on their record. And so it's really difficult for them to have that type of to utilize that type of service without feeling like they're losing something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And I always say it's confidential. I
Yeah.
don't know who has used it. I
Yep.
don't get a report. I have no idea.
mhm.
But I don't have much experience in that. And I just want to make sure that people are utilizing it. If I can help channel that message better as the HR director, then I'm open to ideas.
Yeah, and so really what helps that most is the normalizing of that process, right? The normalizing from the inside out, not necessarily, it's almost like there should be a PR campaign for it.
Yeah.
Part of what I do, and I obviously don't go into corporations and do therapy, although I legitimately could, but as a person who's also a social worker in leadership development, it uniquely qualifies me to be able to navigate some of those waters, right? So even when I work with people, I'm always looking at what are the mindset barriers. What is the thing that's keeping you from the thing? And so being able to navigate that and go around that, and it might be a matter of having someone speak about it. It may be a matter of a one-on-one where they feel less intimidated, but there's probably going to require some sort of PR mechanism,
Sure.
speak, right? Right?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Anybody else? You got me for a little bit. We have at least 4 minutes before the hour's up, but I'll stay for as long as you need. Unless there are no questions. So I want to remind you all again that if a question comes up, you can email me at Rhonda Gipson-Willis. That's GIP as in Paul, SON. If you need any information about services, you can email my assistant at support@rhondagibsonwillis.com. If you'd like more information or to schedule a consult or to talk about the services I provide, whether they are the executive or leadership coaching, the therapeutic life coaching, whether it's leadership training, whether it's the group training program. And for those of you who are here, you'll get a copy of this training as well. So if there's anything you want to revisit, let me know, and it will be more than my pleasure to get that to you. All right, so if there are no other questions, thank you, Brandon. There are no other questions. Rhonda, is there anywhere we can connect with you on social media? Yes. So Brandon, I don't know if you're looking at the screen right now, but I'm on Instagram at @rgipsonwillis. Thank you for that. I'm on Twitter as @rgipsonwillis, and I'm on LinkedIn at Rhonda Gipson-Willis. Currently have a website being put together with the COVID-19 required that I shift a lot of things, right? Whereas I was able to get a lot of my messaging out with networking and going out to events. Now things have to change. And so I'm doing a brand overhaul. So you'll be able to see that. It'll probably be rgwventures.com. But thank you, Amy. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Carla. So, okay. Well, if that is all, I look forward to hopefully working with some of you more outside of this. Outside of COVID-19, when we can get together and actually see each other. Exactly, Janae. I want to see you all in real life. And with that being said, somebody's on. With that being said, I bid you all a farewell and have a great weekend. Bye. Paula.